And it was fun, although a little bit tense to restore. So one of the biggest tension came when the soundtrack was not in sync. And we had all the parts and we could have made it work. And finally the right tape was found in a MGM warehouse in Kansas. MGM had nothing to do with the movie. And it was sort of like, anyway, there was a guy named James Mikowski. I sort of handled the sound, and he handled trying to restore the picture. We worked together until we would have conversations and like, it's just off at this place. Anyway, we found it. And he fantastically found the original negative. When we put out the Blu-ray, and then before that the DVD in 1999 and Palm, we didn't have that. So I think this is one of the reasons that by finding the original negative, cleaning it, having it rescanned, obviously scanning is much more high def nowadays. I think that the color balancing is spectacular and better than ever. I think that, for instance, if you go back and watch your VHS tape, you'll see that sort of the Tom Tom Club doesn't feel it flows quite as well, and now it flows beautifully. And in fact, we even brought in Jordan Cronenweth, the fantastic director of photography's son, who is now a director of photography, to oversee the color balancing, just to be sort of keeping it in the family. Then the final thing is, the final thing is that you will notice that there are certain places where the sync gets a little off, and this is because we shot this over 4 days at the Pantages Theater in Hollywood in December of 1983. And we then picked, we wanted to have a live audience, and we didn't want to make it just about the film. So by doing multiple nights, we could have a big enough audience, and then one night we'd have a railroad track down the middle with a dolly for the very enormous Panaflex 35mm camera, and then one night on that side and one night on that side. But it means that you'll have shots from multiple nights, and so sync can be a little off, because we did not play to a click track. Chris is an unbelievably steady drummer, but is not machine perfect. And we had the option that we could have, now that we had digitized it, we could have probably fixed the sync. But without Jonathan being alive, we thought that was sort of a step too far. And make it sound better, make it look better, but let's not kind of mess with the way it feels in the editing. And the whole reason that we were able to do this is really because Talking Heads owned the film. We took the proceeds from the tour leading up to the film, and we paid for the film, so we believed in it that much. We knew we had this just wonderful show that had, as Jonathan would say, there was a narrative with the beginning so simply and building to the climax of the whole band and these exciting songs. And I think that there's this sense of all the people on stage sort of exuding all this energy and happiness and dancing is why people just want to dance to this film. And to this day, it just brings so much joy. And Jonathan, I think that another thing that he brought to the film is that he had gotten a shot list from Sandy McLeod, who was the assistant director, who had traveled with us and would write down notes. The middle of Girlfriend is Better, make sure you have a camera stage right, because Bernie's going to do something interesting, or Tina and Alex are going to be dancing at this point, because the sort of choreography, like David had decided, he filmed himself and kind of had a dance, like in Once in a Lifetime, like this, okay, that's what I'm doing in that song, and then he had another one for another song, I'm going to jog in this song. And aside, last night someone asked, has anyone tried to figure out the number of calories that we're burning? Which I responded, no, and no one ever has calculated how much sweat was sweating. So anyway, he had figured out what his dance steps were going to be, and he invited Lynn and Enda to come over, and they said, that's cool, no, not going to do that one, but the rest of us, we just sort of were on our own, but the music was so fun and funky, but everybody was dancing. And then, you know, the moments where Alice and I meet in the center of the stage, or Alice is dancing with Tina, or, you know, when David puts his hand on the guitar. These were things that developed over time. And then when that worked, let's do that, we'll keep doing that. So by the time we got to the Pantages, it was as if a fairly complex choreography had been worked out, but it was all organically happening over, I think, the 6 months that we were on tour with this. And so Jonathan, having those notes, was able to sort of, one of the things about this film, which is very different than most concert films, is it's closer. It's more a series of close-ups of things that are happening. There are distance shots, there are side shots. It's beautifully this way, but in general, there's not these distance shots of the whole band playing, except for very certain times, which gives it an intimacy as well as you're seeing people's faces and you see what they're doing. There's no focusing on someone's hands on the guitar, which is it's sort of cliches that happen. And it's because he had these sort of cheat sheets of like, make sure there's something there, and make something there. And also that David and I were there when the edit was going down, and we could say, I remember that something happens here. Let's see if there's a good, oh, there it is. That might be a good idea. And I think that Jonathan kind of saw this almost like ensemble acting, that there are like little dialogues and little smiles and, you know, dancing together, smiles, like even like a slight conversation, things happening, and he would try to catch those, and it gives it an intimacy, and he makes you understand who all the people in the band are. And I think that one of the great things about this is that, and this goes back to when I first put together the band for Remain in Light. When I was teaching people the parts, I tried to give people interesting parts to play, and I certainly was willing to play like the more static or less interesting parts, partially because I could take the joy in the whole thing. I think many bands, when they hire other people to play with them, give them the boring parts so that they can, you know, be more stage center or show off or something like that. But I think that we had this feeling is that we want them to be totally invested in this because we're already there, but we want to make sure that every night that they're there. And I think that there's just this unbelievable discipline of people not playing, overplaying, not playing when they don't have to play. And I would say that nobody's showing off except with the exception of Steve Scales. The irrepressible Steve Scales. I remember like Lynn and Ed would go, God, he sings so out of tune. But he's so great. And when I was on tour with Adrian Belew, he came on stage down in North Carolina. We were on tour with Les Claypool and Sean Lennon, and he barges into their dressing room, which they really are sacrosanct about it. And Les Claypool's wife is become friends with my wife, and she comes up like, who is this guy? What is he? And he goes up to Sean and goes like, yeah, do you remember you were under when I played with Yoko Ono, you were under my table, and you were fascinated by how the ends of my fingers were so big. At this point, Les couldn't kick him out. But then he just walked out and got the audience going. You know, he was limping. He got hit by a car, but he still is there. And, you know, he's still a good friend. So with that, let's open it up to questions.